Alright, so I figured I'd make a video about my Chimera 4 V2 build here that you guys have probably been waiting for a while, and the reason I've been waiting for this is because it doesn't work, and I have been kind of tinkering with this for the last few months without any progress on the performance of this. So I'm basically giving up on this build. I'm going to be moving on to some other builds that have been in the queue. I know a lot of people have been sending me parts and are like, well, where's this so-and-so build? And I usually try and finish one before I move on to the next one, but in this case, I'm unable to. So my goal was to sort of see how this new Dead Cat style V2 frame compared to the original X style frame on the V1. And I did move a few of the parts over, like the GPS and the antenna. But you can see here, I used the Beast. This is all iFlight parts here. So the flight controller is a Beast F1 version 1. And I was trying to use these 1504 motors, 3100 kV. And apparently this combination, this flight controller and this motor, does not seem to like each other. I have tried every combination of firmware, Betaflight firmware, Emu Flight firmware, different combinations of ESC firmware. So these are BLHeli SESCs. I've tried stock firmware. So I've tried the BLHeli, the Jazz Maverick firmware, the BLHeli M firmware, the Blue Jay firmware. I've tried all different combinations of settings, motor timings, DMAG compensation, all sorts of PID tuning changes, filter changes, etc. No matter what I've done, it doesn't seem like there's anything physically wrong with the board or the motors. They all look fine. But I go fly, and anywhere between 10 seconds into the flight to, say, up to about a minute, I can fly around for about a minute, and then all of a sudden I get a desync. And you basically, the desync, one of the motors desyncs, and you get the death spiral, and you crash. And I've changed multiple amounts of settings and have not been able to get this to work. All kinds of different firmware, and the board seems fine. The motor seems fine. Nothing seems burned or damaged. But it's strange that on the bench all the motors spin fine. There doesn't seem to be any kind of like weird shorts or anything anywhere that I can see. No strange behavior. And then once I fly for some amount of time, up to about a minute, I haven't been able to fly longer than a minute. It just desyncs. And so I'm not really sure what the problem is. It could be that the flight controller ESC, there's something physically wrong with it. It's something that I'm not able to see. But the board looks fine. Now, granted, when iFlight sent me these parts, the board and the motors, they sent me the V1, and since then they have, I think there have been 2 revisions. There's a version 1.1 and a 1.2, possibly a third. And this is kind of like why I'm titling this video, why I'm saying that building is kind of becoming very difficult these days. So I've been building quads for many years now, probably like 5 years now. I've built thousands of quads, and it seems as time goes on, as we have a more ecosystem of more variety of parts, things seem to get more complicated and more difficult. So that's why my builds are taking longer. Now, slapping together a bunch of parts, soldering them together, doesn't take long at all. I mean, I can build a quad in probably 30 minutes to an hour. I'm pretty fast now. Getting it to fly properly is a completely different story. And it has a lot to do with compatibility of different parts, settings, what are the proper settings, which ones will work, whether or not you'll get a part that's working or not, or might have some sort of a flaw in it. So these days, I get a lot of questions on my videos. Oh, do you recommend so-and-so part or that part, or how will so-and-so motor work with so-and-so ESC? And oftentimes I don't have a good answer, because there's just so many parts out there, and there's more often than not, having tried a wide variety of them out there. So I would say, out of the parts that are available currently, I've probably only tried a handful of them, small percentage, like I would say less than 10% of stuff that's available. And this kind of, it makes things difficult in terms of making recommendations on what kinds of things will work well together. I mean, you can kind of make recommendations on what things will work, but how well they will work and how well the performance will be, there's no way to know until you actually fly the stuff yourself. And these days, it's almost impossible. So this is why I'm kind of leaning towards, instead of taking a quad and or trying to build a quad from scratch with every individual part separately, I think the better approach these days is to build or to actually buy a bind and fly of a well-known model that a lot of people have recommended and everyone knows works. And if you're a beginner and don't know how to build or repair stuff, I think buying a bind and fly and then learning to repair that bind and fly is going to be easier coming from that basically from that approach, from that angle, instead of trying to build completely from scratch. So I think nowadays trying to build something from scratch is just so challenging because there's so many different parts, and I think there's more and more of these sort of compatibility issues that seem to be coming up now. And for that reason, I think buying a well-known bind and fly that everyone knows works fairly well, and then if you need to make repairs, then at that point you can learn to make repairs. So typically, like on a quad, if you crash, the most common thing that'll happen is you'll break an arm or break a motor, and then you just have to learn how to resolder a motor or replace an arm. That's the most common thing. And then the second most common thing is replacing a camera. So, if you guys want to see videos on how to do that, like common repairs for bind and fly drones, I could probably do something like that. Let me know in the comments. But I think, if you guys are looking for more build videos on like random parts, I think I'm basically gonna start paring those down. I have a bunch of them still in the queue that I get sent a bunch of random parts and let's put them together and see if they work. And as you can see, lately those videos have been slow in coming because I'm having a lot of difficulties getting everything to work together properly. So I think I'm going to be basically cutting that off, and I'm going to come from the other angle and make videos on how to repair popular bind and fly drones. I think that's going to be more useful for beginners. I think a lot more beginners are also into buying bind and fly drones and then learning how to fix those from things that'll typically break. I think that's going to be more useful than trying to make a build video and pull all these parts together and then try and learn how to build everything one by one. Granted, yes, it is useful to learn that way, to learn how to put a quad together. But I think the other problem is once you put everything together, most people have successfully been able to do that, in terms of the soldering, basically soldering on the motors and soldering the stuff to the flight controller. That's all fairly cut and dry. I think the step after that, the configuration, firmware flashing, all that stuff is quite a bit more challenging these days. And which, in case, if you buy a bind and fly from a well-known company like iFlight or Diatone, they've already done the basically the testing already. They already know that these parts work, and they have PIDs and firmware already flashed everything. And generally you want to get something that's been, generally popular, and that most people consider it a good working model. And in that case, I think you'll have a pretty good rate of success in terms of being able to spend more time flying versus crashing and repairing stuff all the time. So I think that's basically my point of this video. These days, is it now September 2021? This is kind of the situation now. And I think that's probably the right approach. And let me know what you guys think in the comments below about your experiences. Oh, also, if anyone out there has this specific combination of the Beast F1 V1 with the 1504 the 1504 motors from iFlight. This specific combination, if you've gotten it to work, let me know in the comments. I would really be interested to hear about your experiences. Regarding this specific build and this motor, the weight, it actually weighs a little bit less than the original version. I think it was maybe like 5 grams of weight savings, because I did go to the all-in-one board and I didn't use screws for the Vista, etc. So it wasn't a huge weight savings, but the motors are much heavier than the 1404 motors. So if you look at the motor size in terms of comparison, the 1504 motor doesn't look that much bigger, but in terms of weight, it's like 8.5 grams for the 1404 motor, and then it's like about 12 grams for the 1504 motor. So the power difference is probably going to be that noticeably different. Granted, I didn't get to fully test this motor. I might move it over to something else later to see if it was just a flight controller board. I just don't have the time right now to actually fully vet this motor out. But I'm thinking, because of the additional weight and not the huge size increase in the motor in terms of the stator volume, you're not really seeing, I don't think there's that much of an advantage in going from 1404 to 1504. So if you guys are wondering about that, I think that's my conclusion on that. I may have to do some more additional testing later when I have more time. But yeah, I think that's going to do for this one. Anyway, just wanted to share my thoughts on this one. This was kind of, I think when you don't succeed, when you have failures, you do tend to learn a lot. And I just wanted to share my findings from this little experience on this particular build project that I'm going to actually move away from and move on to other stuff. But at least you guys will have a video on this Chimera 4 V2 and a conclusion about what's going on with that. I'm either going to take all these parts out and move into something else, or I may try and just move over the parts from the X frame over to the dead cat frame, because I know obviously this works, and this will take a 20 by 20 stack, so I can just move these over here and fly this frame if I want, again later on if I have time. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video.